Hello everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on which part of the globe you are participating from today. On behalf of the Foundation for Agrarian Studies, I welcome you all to this online seminar to discuss the findings on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on aspects of rural economy of India. These findings are based on data collected through telephone surveys in 26 villages across 13 states in the country in the month of September and October, uh, basically covering the Kharif production cycle in India. This is most certainly the last FAS event for the year for 2020, and I'm very thankful to our speakers today, Dr. Tapas Singh Modak, an Associate Research Fellow at FAS, Soham Bhattacharya and Niyati Singaraju, and R. Vijayamba, Senior Research Fellows at the Economic Analysis Unit in the Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore, and our very distinguished chair, Dr. Amit Basole, Associate Professor of Economics at the School of Arts and Sciences, Azim Premji University, Bangalore, to make themselves available. And I'm very grateful to all of you, to all participants who are joining us today on the Zoom platform or any other online platform, be it the Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, to make it possible. And very importantly, I'm also thankful to the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung for jointly organizing this event. The foundation, as many of you know, would be knowing, is a charitable trust based in India. It was established in 2003 with the major objective to facilitate multidisciplinary, theoretical and empirical inquiry in the field of agrarian studies and in India and elsewhere in less developed countries. We work as a network of academics and other scholars and are supported by progressive corporate organizations and donor agencies that are interested in promoting research to eradicate hunger, poverty, and malnutrition, to promote gender equality, and research on measures to reduce social and economic inequalities. Before we begin the proceedings today, I would just take a few moments to speak about the Pandemic Studies Unit, a study unit that was established by the Foundation for Agrarian Studies in the month of July and August. Because this event, after all, is an outcome of the work done by this event, by this unit, by the study unit in the last 5 to 6 months. Uh, the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, has had a deep and multifaceted impact on life, production, and work in rural India. While some of these effects were temporary, the pandemic has changed the Indian countryside in certain permanent ways. FAS has been in front of the studies of the impact of COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdown that followed on India's countryside. We published a major special issue of the Review of Agrarian Studies, RAS Volume 10, Number 1, July to December 2020, which brought together articles on the pandemic and agrarian conditions in India and different parts of the world. In the month of April, we conducted a rapid assessment survey through telephone interviews of more than 50, I think 52 informants from 21 villages across 10 states in India. This survey helped us understand the immediate impact of the pandemic and the lockdown on agriculture production and consequences for households in rural India and for different classes in the countryside. The main results from the survey were published in Frontline magazine and the RAS issue, the Review of Agrarian Studies issue that I just mentioned. The foundation's blog has carried a series of posts on different aspects of the repercussions of the pandemic on society and economy in rural India. The research collaborators at FAS, our trustees, have been speaking on the subject in different online platforms of young students and scholars, unions of peasants and agriculture workers, and women's associations. It is during this continuous academic engagements with the pandemic and its impact on the countryside, we realized that the crisis was still unfolding and that any endeavor to study its consequences would require longer term efforts. It was particularly deemed important to study how the pandemic's impact would pan out in the Kharif production cycle. So this study unit, the Pandemic Studies Unit, was an outcome of this realization. It was formally inaugurated through an online seminar again in the month of September 2020, and was soon uh, followed up with the design, with designing a survey to study the impact of COVID on agriculture production, rural employment, women's work in rural India, food security, indebtedness, and so on. A team was formed and coordinated by Tapas Singh Modak, who will also be speaking here today. Rakesh Kumar Mahato and Shubhajit Patra were part of the core team, and the surveys were designed and guided by Arindam Das. In addition, we brought together a large team of students and scholars from universities and institutes from different parts of the country. I don't remember the exact number who eventually participated, but I think in the training we had more than 30 people. A part of the training that we did, online training that we conducted. So all these students participated with great enthusiasm in the telephone surveys, and it is through these continuous efforts that we today are able to present you our results with some confidence. We could survey 26 villages across 13 states in the country. 5 to 10 households belonging to different socioeconomic classes were surveyed as part of this whole exercise. It was certainly a new and remarkable experience in designing and conducting surveys, and as well as conducting trainings in the online mode with internet and telephones as our main aid. I'm sure we all have grown richer by participating in this whole exercise. The output from the work of the pandemic studies unit includes blog posts, policy briefs, field notes, and webinars. Uh, we have been trying to collate all of them at one place, which is the website of the pandemic studies unit. It is still half complete, but very soon it will be available as a repository of our work on COVID. I will now take a few more minutes to show you how the pandemic studies unit website looks like currently, and it is already up and live, but still incomplete. This is our website, and the FAS website. It will very soon have a tab after the blog tab, which will be the link to the pandemic studies unit website, FAS pandemic studies unit website. Next slide, please. So this is what the website would look like. It will have essentially three segments. The first would be FAS publications, which will be the output of the pandemic studies unit, the research under the pandemic studies unit, and even including the research that was done prior to the formation of this unit. It will have another tab on other publications. We are yet to populate the other two tabs, which is the other publications and events. The other publications will have both FAS, FAS collaborators and the members of the FAS team writing on popular press, as well as our blogs. And the events will be a repository of the events that FAS collaborators and FAS team members have participated in, as well as the events that this online seminar that we have been regularly conducting. I think it is the third or maybe fourth seminar, third online seminar under this broad, as part of the study unit. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay. Now, if the publication section, which has already been populated, will have all the publications that are being published, as part of the efforts by the pandemic studies unit. We currently have uploaded two policy briefs. The first by Dr. Aprajita Bakshi and Soham Bhattacharya, which is on it is called A Step to Further Private and Corporate Interest in Agricultural Land in Karnataka. It is a policy brief which comments on the promulgation of the Karnataka Land Reforms Amendment Ordinance, which was passed very recently, I think in the month of December itself. The second note is by Dr. Samsher Singh, migrant worker in the post-COVID-19 era, another which has already been uploaded, which highlights the crucial role that the migrant workers have been playing in the Indian economy, and which has certainly come about and has been highlighted in the context of the pandemic. The two, the two speech presentations today, one by Tapas and Soham, the other by Niyati and Vijayamba. We are hopeful that they also would be converted into research notes, which will eventually be placed here for everybody to have access and comment on. We also will have the repository will also have all our earlier publications, the our particularly the research articles which were published in the Review of Agrarian Studies. Next slide, please. And if we download, this is how the publications will look like. This, some of you would recall that this was the poster for our pandemic studies unit inaugural webinar, online seminar, and we have decided to continue with that format. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, this is how, if you download, and eventually we would collate them all, and we'll try to publish it as a one full report. Yeah, next please. Yeah, please close the. Okay, so thank you for your patience. This is what something, this is incomplete, work in progress, but I'm sure that within, in the month of January, this website would also be complete. It is already live, and would prove to be a repository for students and scholars who would want to, make use of the work that we have done in the last 6 months. Let me now quickly welcome Dr. Amit Basole, Associate Professor of Economics at the School of Arts and Sciences, Azim Premji University, Bangalore. Dr. Basole's research interests include poverty and inequality, the informal sector, employment, structural change in Indian economy. He has been the lead author of the State of Working India reports that in the last previous 2 years, and has himself been a part of many research initiatives studying the impact of the pandemic on Indian economy. Professor Basole, please, I request you to kindly take over.
Thanks, Sandeepan. And let me start by really commending and appreciating the immense amount of work that FAS has been doing in the last few months to really deepen our understanding of the impact of the pandemic, the lockdown, other measures, and the general economic shock on rural India. I think this has been very important work that a lot of us have been following, and I'm looking forward to the two presentations today, which will further add, no doubt, to our understanding. So let me get to it straight away. The way we are going to do this is we are starting with Tapas and Soham's presentation, and then we'll move straight away to Vijayamba and Niyati's, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. So let me first start by welcoming Tapas Morak and Soham Bhattacharya, both of whom, as Sandeepan mentioned, are scholars who have been working on Indian agriculture and the rural economy, on issues like irrigation, tenancy, and so on. They're either doing or recently finished their PhD from ISI Bangalore, the Economic Analysis Unit, and also associated with FAS. So we'll start with their presentation, Tapas and Soham's presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on the Kharif production cycle. Tapas, Soham, you have around 25 minutes. I'll put a 5-minute warning in the chat so you can start.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. I would start first. Let me share my presentation here. Yeah. Hi. So our title of the presentation is the impact of COVID-19 on the Kharif production cycle. As Sandeepan mentioned, that most of the results will be from the telephonic surveys in 26 villages across 13 states in India. And I and Som will be presenting in this part of the presentation of today's webinar. It already has been discussed by Sandeepan, so I'm not going to repeat about the pandemic studies unit. But one thing I would mention that under the pandemic studies unit, the FS PSU study the impact of the pandemic, even not still not over, the ongoing pandemic on the agricultural production, rural employment, women's work in rural India, food security, consumption, and indebtedness. But in this presentation, we would like to more focus on the agricultural production. So before that, to come to our main topic of our presentation, I would like to briefly introduce about the methodology what we adopted for this study, and it also would be followed for the next presentation by the Niyati and Vijayamba. That the study was conducted during the September and October 2020 in 26 villages across 13 states of India. You all may be aware that FAS has one India-wide program of village studies, which is known as Project on Agrarian Relation in India. Under this program, the FAS has been conducting village studies across states in India. We already till now we have covered almost about 27 villages in 12 states in India during the last 1 decade. So of this total, these 26 villages, 20 villages are from the FS archive, which has been surveyed under the PARI, and the 2 villages are from Kerala, which is surveyed in 2018-19. In these 2 villages is surveyed by Deepak Johnson, who is also senior research fellow at ISI Bangalore. These study villages represent diverse agroecological and socio-economic regions of the country. If you see all the villages, you can see the village has a diverse represent diverse agroecological zones, whereas you can the state-wise different they are covers different agroecological zone of the country, and also the village are the most of the irrigated and some of the dry villages. Among the irrigated village like Anandavaram in Andhra Pradesh, Alubajanali in Karnataka, villages in the Punjab like Tehang and Hakkamala, 2 villages in Lower Kaveri Delta in Tamil Nadu, Palakuchi in Benveni are irrigated by the canal irrigation. But the other irrigated villages are mostly irrigated by the groundwater irrigation using the tube well irrigation. And the villages like Bukacharla in Andhra Pradesh, Japur in North Karnataka, Khaksang in Tripura, these are the villages where the mostly either the dry or only depend on the monsoon rain. So this is the kind of diverse, the villages represent diverse agroecological and diverse the irrigation status. So one thing that I would like to mention that based on the previous detailed survey, which I discussed about under the PARI, a socioeconomic classification of the household was undertaken for all the PARI villages, and households were broadly classified into the different classes following a Maastricht framework, where the households are classified into the classes like landlord, capitalist, peasants, manual worker, and the households that are dependent on the other non-agricultural activities. And the peasantry sections are other further subdivided based on the specific condition of the survey villages. So first, what we have done for this study, first we classified all these households from the FS archive using this criteria into 5 broad classes. One class is the landlord capitalist farmer, second is rich and middle peasant, third is the poor peasant, fourth is the manual worker, and fifth is the other, which is including those non-agricultural activities like the business, salaried, and other kind of work. And from each class, 1 or 2 informants from each class were selected. Also, our engage with these villages from a long term, and also some of our colleagues or our research scholars have been doing studies in these villages. The long relation also allow us to get a good data from all these villages, and also have a good the understanding of the villages also allow us to give a detailed information during this the assessment on different subjects, how the pandemic has been affected on the employment, economy, the life, production. That also allow us to have a good understanding or good information from the villages. So what we've done that from these 5 socioeconomic classes, we selected 1 or 2 informant and we collected from data from there. This means that implies that this survey represented a cross section of the village society of rural India. So though we cannot because here the total there are 164 informants we have we have collected the data. Of these 22 were from landlord and capitalist household, 36 were from rich and middle peasant household, 45 were from poor peasant household, 38 were from manual worker, and the remaining 23 were from the other household who mostly engage on business or the other non-agricultural activities. Though we can say that this kind of represented from sample household, we may not give a generalize our findings, but we can must say that we can also give a some important indication or important observation we can highlight from our survey. Now let's come to our today's the topic of the presentation, which is the impact of COVID-19 on the Kharif production cycle. So here the first question we selected that to us, we asked that is there any changes in the cropping pattern or the in the area shown under the various crops, particularly in comparison to the last previous Kharif season. We also asked that the information on the access to and the cost of cultivation arising from the use of inputs like a seed, fertilizer, pesticide, irrigation, human labor, machinery in the credit. And since the survey was actually conducted between the September and October, we could not collect the realized farm harvest prices at a household level. So what we have done here, they make a commentary on the realized price for the crop produce. We use the data on the agri market data, and we give us some kind of comments on that how the what would be the probable impact of the pandemic for the kharif crop in this year. So out of this total 164 respondents, 129 belong to the farm household. Means this 120 household have operated some kind of land for the cultivation for the kharif crop. But this 129 farm household also belong to across the classes in this 5 broad classes in the survey. So first point here I want to discuss that extension of area under kharif season. It has been discussed widely in the media and also by the Ministry of Agriculture and by the government, which is that shows that the current Kharif rows was marked by an increase in the area under sowing in this year compared to the previous year. According to the latest statement published by the Ministry of Agriculture, there's an increase 4.8% compared to the previous season. In this regard, we observed 3 particularly relevant observations. It would appear that the region and specific factors combined with a good and timely monsoon contribute to the increase in the area under cultivation production. Take example of Bihar, where we see the food and distress-driven return to the farming during the pandemic year. In the 2 villages of northern Bihar, which is like a Katmia and Nayanegar, which were the labor out migration, where especially the households from the landless labor, whether mostly are the Dalit household, traditionally high. These are the household usually migrate out as a agricultural laborer to the Punjab, even as a like unskilled labor and semi-skilled labor to the Delhi, Haryana, Gurgaon, partly on that area in different parts of the country, but mostly on northern cities, they usually migrated out. But after the lockdown, many migrant workers did not return to the cities for work. They stay back to the village in the villages, and some of them reported from our informant that instead they leased in small amount of agricultural land for the personal cultivation. I would like to quote one respondent from the Nayanagar, which is located in Samastipur district. A scheduled caste migrant worker informed us that for the first time in his life, he lived in 10 kattha of land on a share contract for the paddy cultivation solely for the family consumption, which also implies that it is not that in return to the farming is a very prosperous. It is only the objective is to kind of a food security solely or like a income security kind of the motive. Motive is not a very prosperous to return to the agriculture here. The second example I would like to highlight the response from the capitalist farmer from the Tehang village, which is located in Doaba region of Punjab, which is also very prosperous in agriculture, who inform us that because of the increasing cost of cultivation during this pandemic, he increased the area shown under the kharif crops by leasing in another 5 acres of land with an objective of to enhance their total income. And this village also has a, from our study, we found that there is a kind of the capitalist farmer leasing more land to gain income from the farming. But this pandemic year, when there is an increase in the cost of cultivation, I'll come to in the next after this that they increase the cultivation. and the increase the area under cultivation through the leasing in more land. And the third instance, we see that in the canal irrigated villages, like the good monsoon helped to increase the areas on the previously fallow or uncultivated land. Let's take example of the lower Kaveri Delta in Nagapattinam district, where we surveyed two villages recently in 2018-19, which is Palakuchi and Benwani village, where the Kharif cultivation is entirely dependent upon the water is released from the Mettur Dam, which is on the Kaveri River, where when the peasants from Benwani village inform us that almost after 11 years, the farmers were able to cultivate the Kuruvai crops. Kuruvai crops is a short duration crops, usually cultivate during the June to September kind of duration, 3 months, because the Mettur Dam was opened in the early June in the year. So because of this, the good monsoon and the timely rain monsoon came, they could cultivate the Kuruvai crops this year. Similarly, the kind of observation we found in the rain-fed villages, where like a Japur in North Karnataka, Sirasandra in Kolar district, there is a area increased under the pulses or the the second point we would like to highlight the increase in cost of the cultivation. Here, see, it doesn't mean there's an increase in the increase in the area under cultivation, which also lead to an increase in area increase in the production. But it doesn't mean that it will automatically translate to the good income, because in the farming or any kind of production, there's a two component is also very important. One is the cost of cultivation, and the second is the realized price for the agriculture produces. And because of these two components, what we found that this year has proved to be a bad one for farmers. The survey found a sharp increase in the cost of cultivation during the Kharif season from across the country, primarily on account of increase in the cost of input, material input, machinery use, and also for the hired labor. If we take example the material inputs, which mainly the seed, fertilizer, weedicide, pesticide, although it is not widely reported across the classes and across the region, but we see the some kind of observation. If you see this table, let's take example like Anantapuram village, where because of the limited stock in the input shop, the fertilizer prices increased from the cost of the fertilizer for fertilizer increased from 1,150 to 1,300, almost 150 rupees increase per acre. Similarly, in Bihar, because there is a shortage in urea supply, the price of urea per bag increased 50 rupees. Similarly, in Punjab and Rajasthan, the Hakkamala and Rivasi, the seed prices increased because there is a shortage of the supply of the material. So, which I want to conclude here that because of the after immediate lockdown, which ended the end of the May month, and that time there is a disruption in the supply of this kind of inputs, it also has an impact on the first the availability of the inputs in the village level, and there is a shortage of the supply. It increased the cost at a village level, and we can see some of the observation here. Next point, which is significantly increased the cost of cultivation in the Kharif cultivation, which is the hike in the diesel price, and particularly in the month of June. If we take example like for example in the 1st June, the diesel price was 69.39 rupees, which increased to in June 30th 80.53, and the highest it increased is around 82 rupees. This is an increase about 16% in a month. While we all know that June is normally the busiest period of the Kharif crop, which mainly include the land preparation, irrigation, sowing and transplanting, spraying. Most of these operations are highly mechanized across state. And because of the increase in the diesel is the major used for the operating the machines, and because of the hike in the diesel prices, the operating cost for the machines has increased. But from our survey, what we found that though it increased for across the classes, it has disproportionately impacted the marginal and small peasant, because this section of the peasantry primarily hired the machines from the owners. For instance, that survey data which shows that the cost of hired machine for plowing to prepare the land for the any cultivation, the hired machines for the ploughing increased 10 to 15% than the last Kharif season. If you see it's a very approximate estimate where you can see the range from 10 to 50% the increase across the villages. Similarly, we also found that the irrigation cost increased significantly for the villages where diesel operated pumps still are the primary means of irrigation. Like I take an example of villages like a Bihar, like Katkuya and Nayanegar, where still pump set usually the peasants, the poor peasant and the small peasant who doesn't have own the pump set, they hire the machine on an hourly basis to extract the water from the shallow tube well, and it's mostly operated by the diesel pump set. And the per hour, which was earlier the rate was like 150 or 160 rupees, that increased per hour almost 50 to 60 rupees because and all this region has to be given the inform us it's because of the hike in the diesel prices. So this hike in the diesel price has significantly increased the cost of cultivation in the Kharif crop. Now I'd request Soham to continue from here.
Thank you, Tapas. I hope I'm audible. And I thank the foundation, especially the team, as well as our chair, Professor Amin. I'll start with where just Tapas left regarding the cost of cultivation. I'll start with another factor in the cost of cultivation for which there has been a rise in this particular Kharif season that we're concerned with. So we have asked in the survey that this year's cost of labor hiring for different operations and whether it has increased or declined than the previous year's Kharif operation. And through that, we have found a pattern emerging, though not generalizing given that these are a very small number of households that we have surveyed, but there are two particular patterns that are emerging from here. First, that it is in the irrigated regions where compared to the dry regions where the increase in the cost of labor hiring that has been most. One particular reason might be these are also the regions where Kharif crop is mostly paddy, and paddy is particularly labor intensive cost, and due to the lack of labor availability in the initial days, there are in particularly some of the places it might have increased. And second, the response to this cost of labor hiring, that increase in the cost of labor hiring, the response to this has a class differentiated angle to it. First, if I take an example from Tehang, which is a village in Jalandhar district, well irrigated village, a capitalist farmer reported allocating some of his land under direct seeding of rice and shifting to mechanized sowing and due to lack of labor availability. Whereas in case of Nayanegar, Bihar, a poor president reported that for this year's Kharif sowing, he used exchange labor to mitigate this lowered labor availability. And I would like to point out that this increase is particularly, Tapas, can I get the second slide, next slide? Yeah. So the increase is more prominent not only in irrigated villages, also in those irrigated villages where this particular operation of sowing and transplanting is largely done by migrant workers. And as I was telling, that in this particular village of Tehang, it is migrant workers from Bihar who predominantly operate are into this sowing transplanting operation, and therefore due to the lack of physical mobility of these workers and because of the lockdown, this year it has increased by 2,000 per acre due to shortage of farmers. And whereas in the same state, there's another village that was surveyed in this survey, and which is in Mansa district, Hakamwala, where since the dependence on migrant workers were less and local laborers were available, so it has only increased by 500 per acre. And that is also due to increased demand, but the increase is not as much. Now, I would like to point out one important facet here, an important aspect here, that this increased cost of labor hiring means that should reflect into higher realization of wages, and we do not find we do not find any do not find a generalized statement on that the increase in wages, and particularly there are instances from Malwa region in Punjab where we have seen that there are actually a threat to the marginal workers, threat to the landless laborers in order to fix the transplantation wage or something. So although there is change in the cost of labor hiring and that has increased, that has not really, and we cannot generalize it to say that there has not been any wage suppression. There are instances of that, and there are frictions regarding that. Please the next slide. I'll now move on to the, so these are like summarizing these, that there has been increase in the cost of cultivation along with increase in the zone area as well as in the production. Moving on to the agricultural marketing part to it, that next slide please. So and the rapid assessment survey conducted by FAS have already shown during the initial days of lockdown, there has been a total collapse of the local market channels, and particularly this has disrupted the supply chain during that time, and the sale of rabi crops for poor peasants were deeply affected. And these are findings we have seen are reflected in studies by scholars across India. And but from this particular survey, we have conducted it between September and October. So we got information regarding how was the Rabi marketing, including the information on marketing agency, realized prices, what were the transport facilities. And throughout all the villages we have understood, with fewer exceptions such as Kerala and Punjab, serious lack of the institutional mechanism, particularly with respect to the transportation and storage. And in villages where there's heavy dependence on local traders in the surveyed villages, there has been a crucial decline in prices. And specifically for two most important crops such as maize and wheat, it has suffered from a lower realization of prices. And this is with which the Kharif season started. Next slide, please. And as you can see, maize and wheat both in Andhra Pradesh and Bihar have the prices have fallen. But it is not only limited to these two crops. There are instances where vegetable prices have also fallen, where fruit prices have also fallen in villages of Andhra Pradesh. So I'll get back to the numbers if needed. I'll now move on to the Kharif prices that we are interested with. But as a limitation to our study, that the September, October, by then the harvesting did not start. So we had to depend on the official data. And by then, the Press Information Bureau have already announced that the price procurement is at record level, and there are record level of production and procurement through MSP. And although there is a growing resistance against the dismantling of the APMC Mandi system, this particular, we have found that what the distress sales that I have been discussing that was observed in Rabi season is still continuing during the Kharif season. And next slide, please. And we have used the AgMarkNet data for paddy sold in prices below MSP. So apart from the three states of Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, and Punjab, and the bracketed are in the number of mandis that have reported these in the data. And this is for the month of November, during 1st to 30th November. States such as West Bengal and Karnataka show that there are significant number of the a significant amount of their paddy sold. It's in regulated market centers are below MSP. So although there are states such as Punjab and Andhra Pradesh, we can see that MSP is being followed. However, and if this is the paddy being the most procured and protected crop by MSP, we find next slide, please. We find for the other crops, the share of total quantity sold between November below MSP is much higher. So I'll summarize this quickly for this marketing and price realization, that there is a twofold crisis. First, there was distress sales, which have led to indebtedness. And although there has been an increase in the area sown, however, we are seeing that there is increased cost of cultivation, and the price realization is not all across the country, or not all the farmers have realized MSP during this Kharif season. Next slide, please. And along with these, there are two more concerns which I'll raise, and there are in Karnataka, Bihar, we have seen that milk prices have fallen during the lockdown, and it has not picked up since. So when we conducted the survey, there is a range between 10 to 25 rupees per liter of decline across different states. And in Karnataka, particularly in a village, the sericulture was also worst hit by the lockdown and subsequently also. So there's a decline in the price of cocoons that the decline is rupees 200 per kg. So there is no since there is increased cost of cultivation, the other income source, that is of allied activities, are not also as supportive during this particular time. And as a result, we are seeing indebtedness among farmers, and particularly from poor peasant households. And I'll give you two case studies and briefly mention two case studies here regarding the rising indebtedness. Tapas, next slide, please. Yeah. So in Nayanagar village, poor peasant have reported taking a loan from input dealer, and the interest rate have increased from the previous Kharif season. And the second part is particularly important for Antavaram, which is in Guntur district of Andhra Pradesh, that a poor peasant usually takes an advance of 20,000 from a private trader, and that has been taken. But since the maize production was very low, and therefore, in order to mitigate the loss, had to take additional loans from relatives and friends. So now to summarize, Tapas, please. Yeah. So as Tapas has been saying, and that there is of course, there is an increase in the zone area and in production, which is partially driven by a good monsoon, but that is also contributed by the food and income insecurity in certain places of rural India. And this increase in area is also, along with this increase in area, we are also seeing increases in cost of inputs, led by diesel price increase, led by hired machinery cost increase, as well as cost of hired labor has significantly increased. Whereas the MSP that has been announced in this year, the increase, as we have seen, that it is almost 10 to 20% increase in all these three categories that has been reported. However, the increase in MSP than the previous year is on merely about 2 to 5% for most of the Kharif crops. So next slide, Tapas. So the price increase could not be, this MSP which has been announced, it cannot sustain the incomes of the farmers. And I would necessarily point out that there's a serious requirement of immediate intervention from state through regulating prices of inputs, particularly providing formal credit, and better procurement prices should be ensured. Otherwise, this record production or record area would not translate into any higher farming incomes in India. And as our study suggests, that pandemic has hit the poorest sections of the farming community the worst. And thank you, Amit.
Thanks, sir. Tapas. Let us move along, and then we can come back with questions. I forgot to tell the audience earlier, I think most people would know that they can post their questions in the Q&A box in Zoom, or they can also post it in whichever platform they are viewing it on. So we'll be gathering all the questions at the end. The next presentation is by Niyati and Vijayamba, both of whom are senior research fellows in the Economic Analysis Unit in ISI Bangalore, and are also associated with FAS. And both of whose areas of expertise are on women's work, the intersection of rural economy, women's work in India. And they will be speaking about the food security and consumption aspects of the impact of COVID-19 in rural India. So Niyati and Vijayamba, please take it away. If you can keep it to 20 minutes, then we will have time for questions at the end, and I'll give you a 5-minute warning.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Amit, and the Foundation for Agrarian Studies for giving me this opportunity to present the findings from the survey on consumption. So to begin with, just a second. Okay. This is based on the evidence from a sample of 164 rural households from 26 villages across 13 states. And the description of our survey was done by Tapas. So the results are from the same survey. So Vijamba and I would be focusing mainly on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on food consumption and indebtedness. So we also have examined the public support for food and income to the sample households during the pandemic. So I will be focusing on the food consumption and the public support for food aspects, and Vijamba will throw some light on the indebtedness and the income support part. So these were a few questions. So before I make the presentation, I also would like to give the disclaimer that these are certain preliminary impressions from the survey, and we are not making any attempt to generalize the results, but this is basically the perceptive answers, the responses that we got from the households during the interviews. So the main questions that we asked to understand about the food consumption of the patterns of food consumption of the rural households were these. So the first question that we had asked in our interview was that, as compared to the pre-COVID period, how would you describe your food intake in the last 1 month? So the reference period is the last 1 month. So, and these interviews happened between September and October. So one can understand that the reference months would be August and September. And the response for which would be either less than, same, or more than. And then the other question we also asked was about the details of the food categories. That is, apart from the overall food intake, we also inquired regarding the each item that the household had consumed, whether they have consumed the same levels, less or more than the before pandemic period. So, and so the first and the astounding finding that has emerged from our survey is that around 45% of the surveyed households, that is around 73 out of 164 households, reported less food in previous month than before the pandemic. And some of the common reasons, next slide, please. So some of the common reasons for the reduced food consumption that came from the survey are reduced earnings, loss of employment, rise in price of food commodities. As can be seen in an illustration below, wherein a wage worker from Muhripur village in South District of Tripura says that, though the employment situation has improved from April, I have only received 25 days of rubber tree cutting work since July. Due to less income, the quantity of food consumed has reduced. Earlier, we used to consume 3 meals in a day, but now 2 meals. So this is the kind of comments that we had received from the households which responded or which reported saying that they have consumed less than before the pandemic. So this explains the regional spread of this situation, wherein we report the villages wherein 75 to 100% of the sample households have reported less than pre-COVID food consumption. So there are 4 such villages where the situation is such. But here I also would like to mention that we have around 8 villages out of 26 villages where none of our sample respondents reported less than pre-COVID food consumption. But among this, I would specifically like to mention about the 2 UP villages, Harevli and Mahatwar, and a village in Madhya Pradesh, Gharsondi, because here we didn't have enough sample of manual wage worker households. The interviews could not happen with them, and we only had a sample of the capitalist farmer, rich peasant households. So probably that might explain why we didn't find even one household which reported less than pre-COVID food consumption. Now, the next slide. Yeah, so this is about the 4 villages wherein we found more than 75% of households consuming less than pre-COVID food intake. And I would like to briefly mention about these 4 villages. So the villages are Varvat Khanderao in Maharashtra, Nayanagar and Katkuya from Bihar, and Moripur in Tripura. In fact, in Varvat Khanderao, as you can see, 6 out of the 6 sample households had reported less than pre-COVID food consumption. And similarly, in Nayanagar, we had 11 out of 12 households that reported less than pre-COVID food consumption. So why is it so? Apart from the common reasons like reduced employment opportunities and lesser earnings, the other important aspect of these 2 villages, these villages, were that there was also heavy rainfall in Bihar and Tripura regions, and the villages had a severe crop failure in June and July. So a lot of middle peasants also reported losing their crop and reduced earnings in this period. In fact, a rich peasant from Nayanagar village from Samastipur district of Bihar reported that he had cultivated some 5 to 6 acres of sugarcane crop, and that entire crop got damaged in this period. So, and also apart from that, the one more common reason which was also common to these villages was the poor functioning of PDS, regarding which I'll discuss shortly as I make the point on the food support, public support for food. So now coming to the caste-wise distribution of the sample households that consumed less than pre-COVID food intake. In fact, 55% of the scheduled caste households and 63% of the scheduled tribe households reported less than pre-COVID food consumption. And one thing here to notice that scheduled tribe sample is very less, and mostly from Tripura villages, and a couple of them are from, one is from Telangana and Maharashtra. And scheduled caste, I'll also discuss why it is so. So one of the things here is, as you can see, in 5 villages, all our scheduled caste sample respondents, that is all the scheduled caste sample households, had reported less than pre-COVID food consumptions. These are the villages in Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Karnataka and Maharashtra, as you can see here in the first row. And I also would like to mention, in all these villages, the scheduled caste households that we interviewed were mainly landless and dependent on the agricultural and non-agricultural employment. And most of them reported that this particular pandemic period, though there's slightly some improvement from April month, they have not received much employment, and that explains their lesser food consumption in the last 1 month. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So now talking about the manual wage workers. So again, one of the important features of the survey is that a large proportion of manual wage worker households reported less than pre-COVID food consumption. And in fact, in 8 villages, all the manual wage worker households reported lesser consumption. So these 8 villages are as given in the first row, and I would like to briefly discuss some village level factors responsible for that. For instance, in Andhra Pradesh village in Anantavaram, the manual worker respondents generally go to neighboring districts for paddy transplanting work, and this year, because they could not find transport and there were a lot of other difficulties for them to go to those districts to do this particular operation, they lost employment. And also some of them reported that this year cultivators used machine, that is tractor mounted transplanters to do their operations. They didn't receive enough work. So this is, and even for instance, the villages in Tripura, the households reported very less MGNREGS work since the pandemic, and the situation though has mildly improved, but it's still not adequate for them to restore their consumption pre-pandemic. So the next slide, please. So these are some villages where all the poor peasants reported less than pre-COVID food intake. And also I just would like to mention here about the other classes, like in particularly in Nayanagar Katkuya village, we can see that almost all the households belonging to other classes, which basically means I have combined the middle peasants, petty traders, and all of them in that. So in that particular class, almost all of them reported less than pre-COVID food consumption. And one more thing about the petty traders is most of them are like fish sellers, vegetable sellers, or sericulture occupation. And then there are few who were, there's also one particular respondent who was an Asha worker in Varvat Kanderao village in Maharashtra. And she reported that generally she does additional work for as the income from the Asha or the remuneration from the Asha work is not sufficient. But this particular year she could not do or labor out for any such activities, and she lost on her earnings. So these were a few cases that came across in this particular category. And then I would also like to throw some light on the items which was mostly reported, where households reported less consumption. And the one of the 75% of the sample households, that is the households that reported less than pre-COVID food consumption, had lesser consumption of vegetables. So it is also connected somewhere to the PDS aspect, which I will discuss, because most of them could at least maintain the consumption of food grains to the level that they used to earlier, because that was mostly provided under PDS. But vegetables, because the prices were quite high and they could not consume as much. The next slide, please. Yeah, so these are the broad findings from this section. And also, I would also like to add one last finding, which I could not discuss previously, but it is about the intra-household differences, wherein 10 out of 73 households where adults ate less than pre-COVID food consumption, while children consumed the same levels. So now moving on to the public support for food. Next slide. Yeah. So here I would like to discuss about the questions that we had asked during the interview. The next slide. I think there's some lag. Yeah. So the questions that we had asked during our survey were these. Okay. So yeah, these are the questions. And so the first three questions were, the reference period was the last 1 month, and the last three questions were about during the pandemic time. So the first three questions, which basically included about what were the food commodities they received during the last 1 month, and if they had a ration card, what were the commodities they received, if they had received any additional allocation to the normal allocation, and at what price. And the remaining three questions are general response on the situation during the pandemic, like if there was any community kitchen functioning in the village, if the children had received any kind of food provisions from the schools and Anganwadis. So these were the questions where we didn't have a specific reference period, but the first three questions, we have a reference period of the last 1 month. Next slide, please. So the first finding that emerges in this particular section is that, so a large section of rural households, that is 81 out of 164 households, 49% of them had BPL cards and have received food ration in the last 1 month. Sorry, it's not 6 months, but it's in the last 1 month, which is our reference period. In fact, without this intervention, the impact on food intake would have been much worse. Among the 73 households reporting less than pre-COVID food consumption in the past 30 days, 46 of them had below poverty line cards or BPL cards and had received food items from the ration card. And the remaining 27 households had reported not receiving any food ration items from the PDS. So to just, I mean, I had a snapshot of the items that were received, but anyway, going further. So among the 27 households that I mentioned who reported less than normal food intake and did not have BPL cards, the concentration of such households were mainly from Nayanagar and a village in Bihar and Muhuripur village in Tripura. So in Nayanagar village, the common problem that these respondents had was like they were mostly migrant workers who reported that there was some issue with the linking of ration card with the system, and they had to apply fresh, and because of which they could not receive any ration items during the pandemic. And a similar experience was narrated by a manual wage worker in Tripura whose card was not registered and thus did not receive any ration during the pandemic. So because I'm mentioning about this, I also would like to, talk about the regional differences in the functioning of PDS. In our survey, we found that almost all the respondents from Tamil Nadu villages, for instance, received food items from PDS in the last 1 month, but there were issues of delay or leakages. I mean, issues of delay and not receiving food items from PDS in Nayanagar village in Bihar and Muhuripur village in Tripura. So briefly, I would like to put 2 case studies to explain these differences. So there is, for instance, AD, a manual wage worker from Palakurichi village in Tamil Nadu, explained that he lost employment. He works as in a circuit board manufacturing factory as a contract worker, and between April and June he lost employment and could barely have 2 meals in a day. And his wife is also an agricultural wage worker, though the situation of employment improved between September and October, but the household could sustain their consumption because they were receiving 25 kgs of rice, 2 kgs pulses, 1.5 kg of sugar and 1 liter of cooking oil from the ration shop. However, yeah, I mean, as a different example from Tripura village for ARD, a manual worker from Muhripur village in Tripura, he narrates his experience wherein the Panchayat office was supposed to prepare a list of poor households with BPL cards for dispersal of food commodities, but they failed to do so. And along with that, the soaring prices of food items, the respondent could not provide sufficient food to the members of his household. So now the last aspect of this presentation, which I thought is important, is about the food provisions from Anganwadis and schools. So the HRD ministry, in order to ensure each child gets the meal that they are entitled to give, had given 3 options to the states to provide this food. So one is to serve hot cooked meals to the doorsteps, provide monthly ration kits, and provide money conversions, which are called as food security allowances. So only 26 of the 77 households which were entitled to this midday meal scheme had reported receiving food items or provisions or any kind of monetary allowance during this pandemic. The efficient distribution of cooked meals or provisions happened in Anantavaram and the 2 villages in Kerala and the Rajasthan village. So the last slide is just a glimpse of the items that these households received as a midday meal equivalent. Most of them had only received some food grains, and in Andhra Pradesh, they had given 28 eggs per month. So these are the kind of items that they received as a midday meal equivalent. So to conclude, the main findings from the survey on the food support is that public support for food is that there has been there's efficient functioning of ration shops in the villages, without which the situation could have been much worse. Among the 73 households which reported less than pre-COVID food consumption, 46 had BPL cards and had received food items. But the situation was quite worse for the remaining 27 who did not have the BPL cards. And some of them had reported issues with the local administration in linking the card to the system. And also clearly we saw the regional variations in PDS provisioning, and even midday meal scheme, the entitlements, the equivalent provisions of food were received only by a very few number of households. So with this, I would like to conclude my part, and now Vijayamba would discuss about the indebtedness and the income support received by the rural households. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nidhi. So I would like to thank the organizers of Foundation for Agrarian Studies for giving me this opportunity, and Amit for chairing the session. So I would be presenting my findings on indebtedness and income support. So the questions that we asked in indebtedness were if the households had any new instances of borrowing since the lockdown, and if they borrowed, what were the sources of borrowing and the details of the amount borrowed. So the first important finding of this section is that 58 households out of 164 households in our sample, that is 35%, availed loans to cope with the crisis of loss in earnings and employment since the lockdown. And when we looked into the type of loans availed, out of the 58 loans, only 10 were formal loans. So formal loans were basically taken from microfinance institutions, cooperative societies, and commercial banks. And the rest were informal, that were availed from money lenders, friends and families in the villages, input dealers, etc. So, and in these 10 formal loans, 7 loans were taken from Palakurichi village in Tamil Nadu, that were mainly from microfinance institutions, and some of them also pledged gold in commercial banks. Now, looking into the borrowings by socio-economic class, so the incidence of borrowing loans was higher for manual worker households at 53% and poor peasant households at 38%. Compared to others, which was 26%. And in few villages, all the manual worker households borrowed loans. So there were Nayanagar village in Bihar and Harebli village in Uttar Pradesh. Further, looking into the borrowings by caste, so here we see that 60% of the scheduled caste households borrowed informal loans, while only 26% of the other caste households borrowed informal loans. So the scheduled caste households were in immediate need of cash to carry out their expenses. And a point to be noted here is that all the scheduled caste households that borrowed loans had less than an acre of land holdings, and 8 among them were landless. Further, we looked into the connection between the households that consumed less and also that availed loans. So, out of the 73 households that consumed less, 32 households borrowed loans. And it is striking here that in Bihar, 14 households out of the 20 households that consumed less availed loans from informal sources. So the main findings of this section are like this. So one point I want to highlight here is that the nature of loans that were taken shows that among the 58 borrower households, 14 of them mortgaged gold jewelry. And it is important to note here that out of the 14 households, 10 belong to scheduled caste households in Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. Further, the regional disaggregation of the borrowings shows that in Bihar and Tamil Nadu, the borrowings were more. So in Bihar, 62% of the households borrowed loans, and in Tamil Nadu, 83% of the households, took credit. So the households sought all possible ways to get loans at the earliest to manage their current expenses and also to repay the existing loans, because exemptions from the existing loans were given only for the first 2 months, after which they had to continue the repayment. So this added on to their burden. So one respondent from Palakurichi village in Tamil Nadu, said that he had to pledge 2 sovereigns of gold for rupees 20,000, and they needed money to run the house as well as to pay the MFI loans. So a loan of rupees 10,000 was taken from a local money lender and who was repaid at rupees 100 per day. So the need of managing the consumption needs and also repaying the existing loans, I think, added on to the burden for rural households, which forced some of them to sell their assets as well. So that drives me to the next part of my presentation, the sale of assets. So here we asked if the household sold any assets since the pandemic. If yes, what were they, and when did they sell, and for what price? So the findings here are that 26 out of 164 households in our sample sold different kinds of assets. And here also, like the borrowing, scheduled caste households sold more assets than the others. And in the 26 households that sold assets, livestock holdings were most commonly sold. So I will show the table in the next slide. 14 households sold livestock because they were the primary assets that households relied on during an economic crisis. So one of our respondents from Katkuya village in Bihar said that he had to sell 2 goats in the previous month for rupees 2,000 each. So before lockdown, the price was 2,500 to 3,000, and he was forced to sell because of no income during the lockdown. So 2 points need to be noted here. Many households sold livestock, and they were at lower prices. So the distressed sale of livestock holdings were also present. So this table shows the different assets sold during the pandemic. So 14 households sold livestock, and we can see the 2 households sold agricultural land and one sold non-agricultural land also among the 26 households. So just to describe the situation of one household that sold non-agricultural land in Hakamwala village in Punjab. So he was a poor peasant belonging to scheduled caste family. They had 1 acre of cultivable land on which they cultivated wheat in December 2019, and he harvested in April. So he harvested 12 quintals, out of which 10 were sold at lower prices in the market than pre-COVID period. And his wife received minimal days of work for paddy transplantation, as cultivators mainly relied on machines to complete various operations. And he borrowed a loan from a money lender to complete the cultivation of cotton, and further he was forced to sell a small plot of non-agricultural land as well to repay the interest. So this was the situation in many households. So they had to complete the cultivation as well as manage their consumption needs when there were no earnings and less employment. So they resorted to selling assets that they had at their disposal. So the last section is income support. As we all are aware, the government of India announced a fiscal stimulus on March 26, 2020, where rupees 500 was announced to be transferred to all the female Jandan account holders between April and June. And also rupees 2,000 under PM Kisan scheme was announced to be transferred in the first week of April 2020. So we asked the rural households if they received any income support from the government. If yes, under which scheme and how much they received. So the first important finding under this section is that 43% of sample households received income support either from state government or the central government. That is 71 out of 164 households. So further looking into the different schemes, out of the 71 households, we see that 14 households received support under Jan Dhan and 34 households received support under PM Kisan. The rest were state government, which were prevalent mostly in villages of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh that I'll be elaborating in the coming slides. So further income support by caste shows that 45% of the scheduled caste households and 45 of the others as well received income support. So when we looked into the regional disaggregation of the income support, it is seen that in the villages of Rajasthan, that is Revasi, Venmani and Palakurchi in Tamil Nadu and Adat in Kerala, in these villages, more than 80% of the households received income support. Whereas in the villages of Tripura, that is Kakchang, Myanmar, and Muhuripur, no households reported any income transfer. So the factors that came out were that in villages of Tamil Nadu, for instance, there was a efficient functioning PDS along with which an income transfer was facilitated. Whereas in Tripura, the respondents reported that there were issues with local administration and delay in preparing the list of beneficiaries. That resulted in receiving no transfers. So continuing with that point, so in the two villages of Tamil Nadu, all households received rupees 1,000, whereas in Andhra Pradesh, households with BPL cards received rupees 1,000 as income transfers. So the last point that I would like to make here is that less than half of our sample households received any kind of income transfer. And even in households that received any transfer, an income transfer of rupees 500 or under Jan Dhan or rupees 2,000 under PM Kisan is highly inadequate to compensate for the loss of earnings through reduced employment. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijayamba and Niyati. So we have about 15 minutes to go till 6. So let's go straight away to the questions. There are a few questions in the Zoom box I can see. So maybe we can start with those, and then meanwhile people can also put in more. And if I request the organizers also, if there are any other places, YouTube, etc., that have come in, to please post them here. So let us, there's a lot of food for thought, and I think the points raised by Professor Usami are really good ones. It also occurred to me similar questions. You know, to understand the impact on the labor market, it seems to be very tricky what is going on. I think several things have happened at once. So we need to think through this. And the point that he has raised is, how do we see both rising labor costs of hiring with return migration? And to that, I would also add, from a macro perspective, we are also seeing food price inflation. So if we are also seeing a lot of farmers selling under MSP or distress sales or not receiving prices, as well as food price inflation, there's something going on in the middle. And we need to understand that. And then also Professor Usami's point about labor. If there is return migration, in those places, did labor costs at least decline? Did they increase where there was maybe out migration, like Punjab, where people went back to their homes, you know, something like that. So let's start with this and then we can move on. Soham and Tapas, I guess it kind of pertains to your part, so you can take that.
Thanks, Amit. So yeah, I think I should emphasize on the fact that this increase in labor hiring cost, first of all, in this particular survey, it's a very regional study that has emerged from 3 or 4 particular villages. And these 3 or 4 particular, in these villages, through these, for the particular operation of sowing and transplanting, in 3 of these villages, out of these 4, in 3 of these villages, the operation was highly dependent on migrant workers historically. And I think that has some explanation to it for the initial lack of demand. And it would be much to stretch to generalize that in all of the places the sowing, transplanting, cost of labor, hiring must have increased. And to add to that part, and also, I mean, these are also the villages where we are seeing that for paddy cultivation, there is a predominance of large farmers who, in a way, for a timely sowing and transplanting, at least in our sample, who could afford to pay a higher wage in order to complete the sowing, timely sowing. Whereas in case of, say, Nayanagar, in the village in Bihar, we have seen people using exchange labor, like uh, there are usage of exchange labor, family labor, for sowing, transplanting. So I think it's a very regional story of a very highly irrigated region where there was historically a dependence on migrant workers for this particular operation, which sort of explains that increase. And yeah, I would, if Tapas had.
Let me add to one point here. See, this, if we see our villages, like villages in Punjab, like a Tehang village, which is also primarily dependent on the labor from the Bihar or like a eastern UP. And because of there's a disruption in the supply of migrant labor, there's an increase. But like there are other villages, like in villages, for example, in Nimchirgaon in Maharashtra, villages in Anantavaram, in Andhra Pradesh, villages in Panahar, in West Bengal, Bankura district. These all the villages also there are dependent also the neighboring districts, neighboring villages. But when in the month of May or month of June, there is also disruption, also supply of the labor from these neighboring villages, even neighboring the district. I'll take example like a village in Panahar village in Bengal, whereas historically there's a movement of laborers who come from the Jharkhand or the like a western part of the state to the eastern part of the state for the transplanting of the paddy work. But because in this lockdown period, it's totally disrupted and they relied on the local labor. So that labor did not come to the village, the Panahar village for the paddy transplantation. And because of and it resulted that the increase in the paddy transplanted the prices. For example, there is increase, I think 300 to 500 per acre paddy transplantation. And Bihar, there's one actually particularly where the people is to migrate out to the other villages from, for example, if we take example of the village of Katkuya and Nayanagar, one explanation it would be as of now we can give like because of timely monsoon and timely rainfall, and there's a hugely it comes in a sometime, and there's a huge demand for the local the laborer to finish the transplantation work or paddy transplantation operation as soon as possible. So that could be one of the explanations. Also in these villages, the wage may increase because of the sudden increase in the demand of the labor for certain operations. Yeah. So maybe will look for details if we can give some more other.
Just to add to Amit, can I for a minute? I would take.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, along with this increase, I mean, there are instances, particularly from this Malwa region, southern region of Punjab. Since this increase have started happening, and there it is more dependent on local laborers. These operations are more dependent on local laborers. There are threats given from the large farmers from a certain power echelon of the society towards the landless marginal workers, and there is there's a movement also towards fixing the transplantation, fixing the transplanting wage. And there are threats that if they are not working, they'll be paid hefty fines. So there are also frictions and I mean conflicting interests in where it is, and there are instances where wage suppression is also coming from the upper rung of the peasantry. So I think these are some regional dimensions also coming out from this increase. So we cannot, I mean, broadly we cannot generalize it also. Thanks.
Thanks, Tapas. Let me move on maybe to some questions for Vijayamba and Niyati, and then we can come back also. There are some questions about PM Kisan. Professor Usami also had one, Biplab Sarkar also has on PM Kisan implementation. So if you would want to address that, the effectiveness of it, and let me maybe make it also add on what I was thinking, both in terms of Jan Dhan and PM Kisan reach. We saw broadly, of course, what was the reach in overall terms, but do you also know the reach as proportion of people who actually have the accounts or are clearly eligible? So for Jan Dhan, for example, of the proportion of those households who had women with accounts, what percentage received them? And similarly for PM Kisan, are all the households that we are looking at eligible, or as a fraction of eligible households, how many received them? That would also be good to know.
Okay, thank you for this question, Biplab. So, under PM Kisan scheme, I mean, what came out is that basically it is, so as Biplab Sarkar has asked, so there are 3 installments of 2000 to be given throughout the year. And what came out through our results is that some of the households in the northern states, particularly Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, interview was carried out in the month of September, between September and November. So households reported actually receiving even 2 to 3 installments. But what is more important is that not all the households that were eligible received it. So as Amit pointed out, not all the female account holders of Jan Dhan received it, and the same was for PM Kisan. And it is not sufficient to compensate for the loss of earnings and employment. And even what was important is it was not implemented uniformly. So it is asked that if we had any comments from the local administration whether it is implemented uniformly or not. There were high variations. So even in the same villages, those households that were eligible, some received only 1 installment, whereas there were few who received 2 installments, that is 2000 rupees each, that amounts to 4000. So I think it is not a uniform, and not all the households that were eligible under both the schemes received the announced amount as well.
Thanks. Maybe I'll just stay with you, Vijayamba and Niyati, and go to the other question that has been raised in the Google Doc.
Yeah.
So this is about sort of the purpose of loans.
Mm-hmm.
What were the borrowings spent on, basically?
So so we also, it was a kind of a question that asked that what were the loans actually spent on. I think a large number of them said that it is spent on the consumption needs, that is to buy the cereals were actually given through the public distribution system in a large number of villages, as that came as a finding in our food support. But other than that, even to manage the other consumption needs, be it purchase of pulses or meat and eggs in households that did not have support from Anganwadis, I think a large number of households, had to manage the consumption needs, and it was used on it. So, we could not get the specific details through these interviews, but a large understanding is that it was, utilized for consumption, because investment is highly unthinkable in times when there is reduced earnings and employment, where it is highly insufficient to manage their day-to-day expenses itself. So I think consumption needs were the primary concern of the borrowings.
Thanks. Let me go back maybe to Tapas and Soham. There's a question again from Biplab Sarkar about the MSP in Punjab. And in your surveys, you showed that Punjab was actually one of the states where none of the villages had any issues with having to sell below MSP. So this is the question. In the current farmers movement that has been highlighted, would you have anything to say about that?
I think I just read Biplab's question on that, and I think it's something to do with the AgMarkNet reporting. It only 70 regulated markets reported prices in these 1st November to 30th November, and it is that prices is what I am using. And the news reports might be much more varied and from Mondays where it is possible. I would like to like to point out that there are also instances that people traveling from Uttar Pradesh to Punjab to sell the paddy at MSP, and if not MSP, near about MSP with a little lesser prices, because that much of adjustment is given for the transportation. And the second question that is that the farm acts are, it's also the states for Karnataka and West Bengal where we are seeing the paddy prices have been boosted. These are also the states where local private traders are the basic means for selling paddy. And I mean, maybe it's a marker to understand that why regulated markets and why the resonating factors for regulating markets and regulation of MSPs coming out throughout the farmers' protest. And maybe a marker of that would be these are the states where private traders are predominant, and these are the states where the MSP is not even realized in the regulated markets.
Let me take one last question for you too, which is Raghav's question on whether NREGA has anything to do with what is being observed in the local labor markets for agricultural labor.
So I'm
Either.
Yes.
Tapas, yeah.
I don't think so, because in this particularly this pandemic time, the REGA has any implication on this kind of observation we don't find. But to add that previous in this regard, when we discussed earlier, I was thinking about that. Also from the employment data, what we found that though even in the kind of villages in like a Bihar and like where the actually surplus labor is there because the people are migrated back to their villages, there is a certain increase for certain operation, like for the paddy transplant, which I was telling, because of the demand, certain demand for that for paddy transplantation. But when we look the employment days data, it is very because we also collected the data on the employment, which we've not presented today. But where we see that the number of days of employment for the each worker, it is very minimal. What I meant to say, though the increase, there is an increase in wage rate, but it may not when you look at the like income level, it may not be that it translates as a like income. There is increase in the income level for the employment wage worker, but we have to investigate more that. Just I want to make this point.
Right. So you in other words, for NREGA at least, there doesn't seem to be any story behind effective implementation of NREGA raising the cost of agricultural labor. You don't see anything like that.
Yeah, maybe that part actually I'm not. But what from my interview, because I also part of, I have not seen. Maybe we'll get. This is required some investigation, because some analysis of the data that I not will do. Maybe we'll reply after some time. We'll check in the data.
Okay, thanks. Let me go back to then Vijayamba and Niyati, and maybe this can be, we can wrap up with this unless there are more questions. There are a couple of questions, one by Sridhar on specifically on women and children sort of intra-household issues, which you briefly alluded to, but maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. And then there is a question which is more sort of maybe sort of suggestions for future work with this survey on more detailed caste-wise and social category-wise analysis of indebtedness. But you can address that if you wish. So both of these questions.
Yeah, regarding the intra-household consumption patterns. So one of the important thing which I mentioned is that, I mean, in many households, the adults reported that they consumed lesser because they wanted their children to be fed sufficiently. With respect to women, we didn't find, because I'm not really sure, earlier also probably there could have been intra-household consumption differences and variations, because women in several of these, one of the things which we found during a time use survey in Karnataka villages was also that women generally consumed lesser meals than the men of the household. So maybe for them as such, we could not find a reduction, but we could clearly see that adults, particularly manual wage worker households, they reported that they were consuming less so that the children were at least fed as much as they could. So that is something which we found. And also one more thing I wanted to add, because I mean I didn't make it through the presentation, but one thing is about the female headed households. So we had around 9 female headed households in our sample, and in fact in that around 5 were manual, 4 of them were manual wage workers, and 2 were petty traders. And in fact 5 out of the 9 female headed households reported less food consumption during the last month. So and most of them, their situation looked even grim, because they were saying that they had no support, they could not even borrow loans or anything during this period. And so in that sense, the narrations that came from these households were of extreme misery, wherein they could not feed anyone in the household the adequate meals. So that is to answer on this question.
Thanks. So maybe, yeah, I don't see anything more here, but I just, before we wrap up, I mean, I'll just maybe make a quick comment. It's of course very rich survey, and I'm sure you'll continue to do, and I'm also happy to hear that there's employment data in there as well. So look forward to also seeing that analyzed. And I think it's very timely, because you know, this month in January, we're going to see a lot of writing around what is expected in the budget, and whether it materializes or not. I think it's really important to lay out this there and put it in the context what is needed to be done. And the 2 big takeaways that I have from your work is that the shock is tremendous. It's ongoing and evolving. It's not really over. The extent of current support falls short. PDS is important. It seems to be quite effective, and I think continuing, as far as I know, the extra rations bit has already expired in November. I don't think that was extended. So bringing that back seems like a good idea. Of course, direct cash support, I think still there's a strong case to be made for it. There is a lot of writing coming out that maybe the moment has passed and maybe we don't need to do it, etc. But I don't think that is correct, and you're certainly showing data to the effect that the income shock is persisting, transmitted through most likely the end of the Kharif sales as well. So both Rabi sales and Kharif sales for this year would have resulted in lower incomes for farmers. And of course, we know that the urban informal sector has obviously been affected a lot. So all of this builds up to, I think, using PM Kisan, Jan Dhan, any available method to do more cash transfers, I would say. It would be great to see some of these findings, coming out soon to build up this pressure. And even if it doesn't translate into, let's say, budget announcements, there's still plenty of room after that to keep up the pressure on policymakers, both at the state and center. I think one of the other interesting things in your presentation is the state level variations, not only in the nature of the shock, but also the reach of policy measures and effectiveness of policy measures. And in fact, for cash support, it is very clear whether you look at just general cash support or to targeted groups or pensions. Many cases, states have gone well beyond what the center has done, even though they are actually fiscally a lot more constrained than the center. So again, it would be great to bring out that and say, look, because the center is not doing it, the burden is falling on the states who actually cannot bear the expense. So, we need to put that out also strongly. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to kind of broadly make those comments, and I'll hand it over to you, Sandeepan. I unfortunately have to leave a few minutes, but really enjoyed this presentation. Look forward to the writings.
Thank you, Amit. And thanks a lot once again to the speakers, Niyati, Vijayamba, Tapas, and Soham. It was a very fruitful discussion. In fact, there is another comment that I see in the Q&A box. Maybe I'll just, which by Professor Judith, I don't see it anymore. So anyway, so which says that, which she also comments on the fact that if we can bring out the richness that comes along with the diversity of these villages, that will be very interesting. So I'm sure that is okay. So that is something that will be, perhaps you would want to take up as further work. In fact, there is this session makes it clear that there is a lot that that there is a lot of hard work that has gone into it, and I'm very happy to see it being appreciated. But there is a lot of prospect in the data that perhaps some of you would like to take up. Particularly, I would request Tapas, the coordinator of the pandemic studies unit, to look at some of these very interesting conflicts, like the breakdown between the demand of labor and the supply of labor, which very clearly was highlighted by Professor Usami, and similarly Amit pointed out the a similar conundrum in the product market, where there is food inflation, but at the same time there is a lack of realization of prices. There are newer questions again, which perhaps we have the data on, and let's see if we can use them. So I'm sure that the four of you, and even others like Arindam, Rakesh, and Shubhajit, who are part of this team, would be perhaps looking into. So thank you once again. It was a very enriching session, and let me take this opportunity to, because this would be our as I mentioned in the beginning, this is our last event for 2020, and certainly for the last event for the under the pandemic studies unit as well for this year. So let me take some time to thank everyone who has made the pandemic studies unit a success, I mean, of whatever scale that it has reached. This I would like to start with thanking those who have been from the beginning part, while we were trying to conceptualize an idea on how to study the pandemic. There were few people who were at the very core of it from the beginning, starting with in no defined order: V. Sridhar, R. Ramakumar, Aparajita, Dr. Aparajita, Professor Madhura, our trustees, Professor Madhura Swaminathan, Professor V.K. Ramachandran, V. Namashivayam, Deepak Johnson, Parvati, who has been, a lot of our writing that we have been trying, to sort of develop. She has been instrumental in shaping them up. Professor T. Jayaraman. So these collaborators have been consistently helping us and helping the pandemic studies unit. So I'm very thankful to all of you. I am also thankful once again. Let me and in fact, Nihira, if you could convert.
Yeah, we're in the process of doing that, Sandeepan.
Pardon?
We are in the process of converting everyone.
Okay. So let me just name the data collection team, and I may have, I may miss one or two. So I'm sorry. Let me apologize on advance. Although I have tried to recall all the names who were part of the training and who have been consistently helping us with the surveys. State-wise, I would go state-wise. For Punjab, Gaurav Bansal, Soham, and Gurdeep.
That's it.
I hope, and I'm very happy to see many of those who were part of these surveys are also today part of this webinar. I saw Gaurav. I've not seen Gurdeep, but yeah, and Soham of course is there. For Tamil Nadu, Jhansi Rani, Muthu Neela, and Setu. For Maharashtra, Shruti Nagabhushan and Hitesh Poddar. For Karnataka, Divya S. Devadiga, Vijayamba, and Vijay Kumar. For Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, we have Niyati, who had helped us with conducting these surveys. For Tripura, it was Daya Mohan and Shubhajit Patra. For Bihar, we had Rakesh Kumar Mahato and Nupur Verma. Rakesh was also part of the, he also conducted the surveys for Rajasthan. For the state of Uttar Pradesh, we had Kunal Munjal, Ritam Datta, and Samsher Singh. For Bengal, we had Shubhajit and Ranjani Basu, and Tapas was part of that team, Tapas Modak. For Madhya Pradesh, we had Arindam and Prakash. For the state of Kerala, we had Riya, Durga and Deepak Johnson. And yeah, so this was a team of about 27 to 30 people who have worked in the months of October and November once the idea was formulated. So thank you. I would like to thank you all once again. The data that we have been able to produce and the analysis, which is based on that data, is an outcome of the hard work of this team. Yeah, and with this, I think if we can, Nihira, would you take some more time?
No, everyone has been converted. So everyone, if they can turn on
Yeah,
their video right now.
may I request all of you to please switch on your videos if that is possible, if your bandwidth allows. Also, I would like to read the comment by Professor Judith here. She says, these results are extremely interesting, if only to give us a sense of variety of experiences that are being reported. One of the more worrying things is the increase in indebtedness, which leads to questions of the longer term. So, yeah, certainly, on one hand, we are very grateful that it has received the kind of appreciation it has. At the same time, there are many questions that it is clear that there are further questions that can be taken up based on this data. So we'll just take a screenshot of all the participants and okay, so Nihira, if we are done with the formality, we'll close the session.
Yes, Sandeepan.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks once again. And we hope that we'll keep up the work under the Pandemic Studies Unit in the next few months as well. Thank you and Happy New Year.